Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a review of the first patch of Endwalker. This one is unique amongst all the patches from previous expansions, as instead of continuing and building upon the story, 6.1 is instead the beginning of an entirely new tale, and is already giving us story hints for what's to come for the next decade of Final Fantasy XIV content. So before I dive more into story specifics and everything else that came with this patch, there will be spoilers ahead. So to begin, I'll give people who haven't completed the story an extra moment click off the video, and touch on some of the major changes that came in with this patch. The first being the changes to A Realm Reborn, with both the introduction of the trust system for all mandatory dungeons 1 to 50, and the changes to the main scenario questing. The introduction of the trust system is just that. Nothing fancy, but it's incredible to actually see the FF team going back and really caring about the new player experience, as ultimately the biggest hurdle to getting into the game really is A Realm Reborn. The story takes a while to get going, the combat can be very plain, as most classes are pretty boring until around level 50, especially the ones you've got access to at the start as a new player, so really anything they do to make that process smoother for new players is a good thing in my book. Continuing that theme, with another big change to A Realm Reborn is something for new players and old, as the capstone missions of ARR have been more extensively reworked, with the two old main scenarios, Praetorium and Castrum, being split into two 4-man dungeons, a trial, and then a separate boss fight against the La Habrea. All of this is brilliant. The dungeons are incredible, the trial is wondrous. Instead of having to spend an hour in those main scenario instances switching between hectic speedrunning and super long cutscenes, you've actually got to do mechanics, go through normally and enjoy the time. The cutscenes, while still mostly there, are split so they don't get too grating in a single sitting. Still gives a ton of experience to queue up as an older player, far nicer experience for a new player. All in all, such a nice change brought in with this patch. Now just one of the more interesting features added in my opinion is the crystalline conflict, with a pretty substantial departure from the rest of the PvP system. For starters, you have an entirely different set of PvP abilities. The maps actually impact gameplay, from adding jump pads to the arena or an eruption event which deals damage to players who can't avoid the incoming meteors, and so far it really looks like it's been a very well liked addition by the PvP community, as the small scale of the abilities should make it easier to get into and easier for the Final Fantasy XIV team to balance. The only downside I've heard is that teams aren't naturally balanced, so if one team has a healer and yours doesn't, it can be a pretty big uphill battle sometimes. While not a big PvPer myself, and I'd like to thank Zinthos on my Discord for help on this point, it's really good to see them having put in a lot more effort into this system for the people who are PvPers, as really Final Fantasy XIV does try its best to cater to a wide audience, or at the very least has a lot of things for people to try if they want to give it a go. Although to move swiftly along, not everything they've added into the game has been good, with the housing lottery causing no end of headaches for players in the Final Fantasy XIV team. Housing more broadly has always been a bit of an issue, with not nearly enough to go around, and this lottery was an attempt to make it more fair to people. The problem is that the system broke. Some people managed to secure the houses they won, but others went back to the plot to see that nobody won despite having to put down the deposit. So while the houses has been stopped while they fix up these issues with the lottery, I'm still seeing the actual issue with the housing system continuing even when that lottery system is fixed. It still very much seems that there is more demand than supply, even with the addition of the housing district in Nishgard. So at this stage, I hope they look up to open up more wards in the current districts, or the island sanctuaries that are coming in a future Endwalker patch act as de facto housing, just without the quasi-community aspect of being around other homeowners. Those are the things that changed for everyone. So let's go back to the end game with a continuance of the MSQ and the new raid. So from here, it's nothing but spoilers, so you've certainly been warned at this stage. The first thing I do want to mention is, on a meta level, how important the decision to end the story arc between ARR and Endwalker actually is. The patch's title, Newfound Adventure, has allowed our characters to return back to a baser form. The power levels are being brought back and reset from the heights of travelling to the edge of the universe in a god-powered spaceship to fight the very embodiment of bad vibes. This, in effect, is going to prevent Final Fantasy XIV's story from falling into the same trap that World of Warcraft did, that it always has to ramp up the power. So when they ran out of already established villains and allies, they had to effectively retcon in an extra layer of power level around itself, moving from Titans to the first ones and Demons to the Void, with Shadowlands really highlighting how this can be a complete narrative disaster. So massive kudos for taking this approach. To the actual story, in relative summary, while the patch title is Newfound Adventure, you only really do classical adventuring for a little while. Getting the treasure map, assembling a crack team, then the new dungeon to get to the end was only a about half the patch story before launching into the next cosmic hook with the Void. While I certainly enjoyed going back on an old-style treasure hunt beneath the bounty, the twist that this was basically just Vitra's treasure hoard, and that has had a ton of extra Guardians just kind of in storage for it, was a pretty interesting one. In classic Final Fantasy XIV fashion though, I really do appreciate instead of just dropping the point of finding Vitra's bank and moving straight into the natural Void gate in the vault, we resolve the plot by asking around on how to invest the money back into the community and then doing it in a pretty reasonable way, which if I had done a review for every patch previously, I would have definitely made this point over and over again that ultimately Final Fantasy XIV really doesn't waste plot points, even going back to an idea of this is a similar callback to when an issue came up in Alamigo in Stormblood, and they went to the Mad King's Trove to get the funds to fix a lot of the issues. So the cyclical nature of Final Fantasy XIV's story is absolutely incredible. But, of course, with that story point put to rest, all of that was almost a bit of filler for the next arc. With that being, the other shards that were previously taken over by a certain element are now in cahoots to destroy the source or take it over with the Void. It was pretty cool to see the Black Knight and the Elemental Lords actually sitting down to discuss what was going on, as well as the natural rift that formed to the source. Presumably as well, there are other natural rifts to other planes of existence as well, although if that is the case, or if it'll become a point, remains to be seen. On top of just natural rifts existing, I actually really love the solution they've come up with in the man-made Atomos. Seems like a bit of a danger to create a demon to, I imagine, vore you into the Void dimension until you've done what you need to do, but the creation process and everyone finally pushing Vitra to actually come along to check things out for himself was a nice one. Able to travel and meet people more, look at forbidden knowledge, and of course, plan an adventure into the 13th. Otherwise, the biggest thing appears to be Vitra's sister, and another member of the first brood in the Void. Considering the Dragon Scales are pretty good at mitigating the Void energies, but we still need to get it reinforced by the Ironworks, I'm guessing when we go in there, we'll pretty much find a messed up dragon. So, I'm going to call it now that in one of the future trials, maybe patch 6.3, there will be a Void Dragon. We'll probably get a couple more hints, and she may have some dying words that illuminates what's going on in the Void, but that's my call with where things are at the moment, or at least with specifically Vitra's sister. As the other interesting thing that we saw in the Void was Xenos' old Reaper Simulacrum, his shadow that is now released from his contract and was just walking the Void. He was the one with the weird hands over his eyes from out of nowhere kind of dude. And aside from him being a very cool design, he's also one of the few characters in the Void actively that who has seen how powerful we are. I wouldn't be surprised that when we go to the 13th we'll meet him and he'll actually be more of a ally than anything else. Or at the very least in the same way of, alright, don't kill me, here's a bit of a hand. So I'm going to also make the prediction that we will meet him and he will be a friend or at worst a reluctant ally. So all in all, the patch story I felt was pretty nice. A lot of going from place to place, seeing characters again, and setting up for the future. But all in all, solid. It's going places and I'm keen to see where they are. Although for now, my predictions, just to recap, Void Dragon in 6.3, Xenos' Shadow being a friend, and my biggest prediction, which I made back in my reaction to Endwalker, is that we're still on track for a Mercedian expansion next, as we've been talking a lot about the Void and the Dragons, and where did those two things fight? Back in the, I believe it was the third Astral Era with the Alligans in Mercedia. So those are my predictions. But with those out of the way, the final thing I want to talk about this patch is the new Alliance raid series Myths of the Realm, with the first 4 bosses being released. I am very perplexed that they went this hard and just straight up throwing the 12 gods at us this quickly. When I heard that they were going to have us have a look at the 12, I thought it was going to be through avatars or creatures of the heavens, not just the going to the gods directly. While story-wise, it's still a bit vague about testing the power of man, which at this stage I thought was tested beyond reproach. It'll be interesting to see how this develops, as surely they're not going to just use the 12 for this Alliance raid and then never bring them up in future expansions. So I'm certainly keen for more raid just to see where the story goes. As for the mechanics and the fights themselves, the boss arenas match perfectly to each of them. The fight with Ralgar especially, finally getting to fight in the palm of that giant statue we see in Gear Urbania, was perfect. They really outdid themselves on the designs of not only the arenas, but also the gods themselves. Nalthal especially comes to mind here. The fights themselves are incredible fun, if a little brain twisting. I'm not surprised a lot of raids have wiped on some of these encounters, and it's going to take a couple more weeks to finally understand what's going on myself, but I'm enjoying it, so that's really the key thing in a game. I will also point out, for those who may have missed it, that each of the 12 have an elemental aspect, 2 for each of the 6 elements. So this time we cleared the lightning and fire gods, so I'll be interested to see what combination of elements we'll get next time. For now though, if you want to see a bit more about the gods, then I do have a lore video looking into them, which I'll link in the description below if you want a hint of what we might come up against next. Everything so far they've added this patch has been amazing, and outside from the hiccup with the housing system, they've done exceptional work. I'm keen to get my weekly Alliance raid in for more fending gear. I'm excited to see where the story goes from here, and I'm looking forward to getting a bit more into the PvP with Crystalline Conflict. Overall, I give this patch water out of froth and foam. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments below what your favourite thing about this patch was, and while you're down there, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe as well. But no matter what you do, have an excellent day.